crank it up. Grumpy&Ginger, yeah. Feel the vibe electric, yeah. Rock and roll without a care. Tune in, friends, if you dare.
Hello and welcome to another podcast review, where today I'll be looking to do something a little bit different, where I'm going to be reviewing a whole album rather than a track. Now, for those of you that have listened to the podcast before, it will be no surprise that the album that I'm looking to review today is Linkin Park's debut album from their new lineup, From Zero. Now, the album, as far as video is concerned, there's a lot of visualizers, so I'm not going to be putting those in, but what I will be doing is covering certainly one of the tracks, which I'll mention later on as a instant hit as a separate podcast. This is quite possibly one of the most eclectic albums I've listened to, certainly one that I've listened to in recent times. I think the last one that even came close was Perfect Circle, Eat the Elephant, which was really eclectic, and you'll get what I mean by that as we go through this. One of the main reasons why I'm not putting videos in this is because this really is an album that needs to be listened to uninterrupted. So if you've not listened to it yet and you're listening to this podcast first, great, welcome. If you have listened to the album and you're now scouring YouTube to see what other people thought of it, also really, really welcome. And I'd love to hear from you in the comment section from either stance as to what your thoughts are, whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying, and a like and subscribe would also be really, really welcomed. So without further ado, let's get into it. What I really didn't expect to hear in the first few notes of the first track on this brand new album is this really choral synth, but choral collection of 4 notes. So it's just a A, B flat, F and G. So after that, that's it musically. We've got Emily and Mike talking to each other very, very briefly, and the first track comes in. But that first impression, like I said, those first few notes, it's like, what is this? This is really, really different. It sounds different. What is the album going to bring? And even though it was really short, and I'm probably talking about it more than the length of the track, it was a really great starting point of suspense, of anticipation, and that's the exact feeling that you want to invoke in your listener when you're bringing something new out. So well done to the band on that one. So the next track up on the album is The Emptiness Machine, and I've got a real soft spot for this track. Not only the fact that it's a great track, but it's the first one that I reviewed on this channel. When thinking about what I did say in that review, there's very little that I would change. Obviously, I've listened to it a hell of a lot more since it first came out, because it's been out quite a while. But if there's anything to say about where I did pick it apart, it's that there is something there to pick apart. And that is down to really good writing and having those layers and depth in a track, which makes the track really good, which makes the band really good, and gives people things to talk about. With that said, let's move on. Track 3, Cut the Bridge. Now this is the first track since the full album's been released that's the new music. Obviously we've had Over Each Other released, and we've had Two-Face released, which I will get onto, but hearing the album in its entirety, this was the track that it's like, right, okay, if there's any track that I'm going to intently listen to, this is going to be it. And on the whole, this track generally doesn't disappoint. It kicks off with this really straightforward drum beat throughout, which really drives the pace of the track really, really well. And then you come into the guitar chord structure, which, from what we've heard prior to this, not looking at conventional chord structures in how they write the music. So this didn't massively surprise me, having looked at previous tracks. So we've got G minor as the root chord, B flat as the third, A as the second, and D as the fifth. And that's pretty much the first minute of the song over and done with. Just as you get your head around that, it then changes into this almost psychedelic, dreamy bridge that Emily sings really sweetly and really melodically, but it lasts 5 or 6 seconds. So you start listening to that and you hit with the chorus. It's like, right, okay, we're back again. Let's go. As Emily's singing, there's that rawness that we've become familiar with in a voice. It's not full whack 100%, but it's a definite shift into something a little bit more hardcore. And it's supported perfectly with Mike's response in this call and response thing, the to and fro between them. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about listening to the whole album in its entirety. You get to see some of the themes, get to hear some of the themes that come through the tracks and how it all fits together. As eclectic as it is, it does all fit together. Track 4, Heavy as the Crown, the track that got away. The one that I said right from the first review that I would review it, and it never happened. So here it is, a really shortened version of a review of a track that we're all very, very familiar with by now. I'm just looking through the notes that I wrote, that I scribbled down when this track first came out to prepare to do the podcast. And there's 1 or 2 points on there that are actually noteworthy. So it was the second track that they released. And in the first track, Emptiness Machine, it was really clearly a massive nod to Numb. So when this track came out and the first few bars sounded like Faints, it was a case of, okay, I get it, but Mike, where's this massive change that you were on about? And I made direct reference to that in the first review. Now, several weeks later, I couldn't be more wrong. The massive changes, the new styles, it's all there as promised. And I think that's one of the big achievements of this album. It does everything for everyone without hacking anybody off. Not too much anyway. But let's not get distracted by the politics and history of the band and where their music has come from and where it's going to. Back to the track. So whether you like the video or not, that's really, kind of subjective. There's some people that are going to naturally love it because it's linked to the game and what that means to them. There's others that won't. Let's keep it short. But musically speaking, there's 2 things that I want to point out. Firstly, the first verse, this relationship between the drums and the bass, it's absolutely brilliant. I know I said in the overview review about it being really sporadic and mad, and it didn't for me work. But there was a very, very similar thing in this track, that sporadicness, that randomness, that really, really, really did work in this track. The second point is probably the most obvious one. It's that note. 9 bars long, 15 seconds in real money. I know it's been talked about loads and loads, but it doesn't mean to say that it isn't worth talking about and mentioning, because I'm sure it will go down in the annals of music history. Absolute perfection, and the recovery from it straight back into the next few lines with the strength and control that she does just as well live as she does in the studio, which makes it all the more sweeter. So track 5, Over Each Other, one that I'm not going to spend too much time on. Firstly, because I did a full review on it, and secondly, the review wasn't that great. So if you do want to listen to that review and check out the details, by all means do. But I'm going to skip straight on to the next track, which is Casualty. Now, I first heard this track on a YouTube video of a member of the audience that was at one of the live gigs. So it was a phone recording. And my first impressions of it was, I need to listen to this on the album to give it a fair shout. Because what I heard on that live recording wasn't brilliant, but it would be unfair to judge it on a phone recording in a crowd in a live performance. And I was absolutely right. So now I've listened to the studio version, I can give it that fair shout. The most objective thing I can say about Casualty is it's definitely the hardest, rawest track on the album. In a lot of ways, when I first listened to it, it was quite nostalgic because it really had that very early punk rock sound to it. And unless you listen regularly to like thrash metal and death metal and black metal, it's not something here in the mainstream. So in a lot of ways, it was quite refreshing because of how different it was, how primal it is. With that said, if you skip to the track about 1 minute 30, the vocals completely and utterly change. Emily is almost crying. And if she's not crying, she's doing a really good job of mimicking crying. The impact that voice change has is really, really, really powerful. And it only lasts about 10-15 seconds, but that's all that's needed. You know, after about a minute and 30, you're really quite acclimatized to the rawness and heaviness of the track. And then it just cuts out to this crying, 10-15 seconds, and then comes back in. And I was certainly left feeling, what was that? Wow. Track 7, Overflow. Have Linkin Park gone dubstep? In this track, the first 40 seconds are instrumental. We've got some synthy keys. We've got some synthy drums. It's really atmospheric. And it's a pretty cool place in the suspense where it leaves. Obviously, that wasn't my first reaction about the dubstep thing. It was when the vocals kicked in. It's like, okay, this is a different kind of rapping. It's got a different kind of flow to it. And while the hip-hop certainly, maybe not so much dubstep, isn't new to Linkin Park, they did the stuff with Jay-Z, it's certainly not something that I expected to hear on this album. But by the time we got to this point in the album, it was a case of really anything can happen. For me, this track was yet another example of this synergy that Emily and Mike have formed. And it's a really, really good synergy. So far we've had, you know, kind of Emily pumping through the hardcore stuff, the power voice, and Mike supporting that with rapping and with harmonies. In the chorus of this track, what was nice to hear is that flipped. So Emily actually harmonizing an undertone to Mike's chorus. It did flip back, but even when it flipped back, if you look at that, if you listen back to that whole chorus, how they work together, how their voices work together, the style and tone that they choose for how they sing and accentuate the words works really, really, really well. So whether you like this genre or not, objectively musically, you can't deny, you can't take away from the quality and depth of thought that went into creating it and those layers that were in the track. Track 8, Two-Faced. Now this is going to be another one that is really short and sweet because this is the track I was on about at the start of the podcast that I'm going to do a separate review on. It's that good. Or at least in my opinion it is. I've been a little bit obsessed with it. There is so much to say about it. Massively addictive. And I will leave it at that for now for you to check out the full detail review in the next podcast. So that moves us on to track 9, Stained. Now, as I'm looking at the notes I've scribbled down for this, there are more words that are in inverted commas than the ones that aren't. In short, Emily goes pop on this with what she sings, with how she sings it. It's very commercial. Not going to lie, there's no other way I can put it. It starts off rather dark and rocky, but then it goes very Tattoo. You know that track, All the Things She Said? Yeah, it sounds quite a bit like that, in my opinion anyway. Now, Mike does pull it back with his rock vocals, and Emily does fall in line with the echo response, but the echo response thing gets a little bit repetitive to a point where it sounds like a scout campfire song, you know, everywhere they go. So, in short, it's certainly not top of my list for best track of the album, but there is some depth in the lyrics. if you can get over how they're sung. So we're now on our penultimate track, IGYEIN, which, as we'll find out from the lyrics pretty quickly, stands for I gave you everything I had. Now, after listening to Stained and looking at the title of this track, I thought, here we go, it's another Tattoo track. I couldn't have been more wrong. Now, I haven't got a clue how this song would have panned out if Chester was singing it, but it's not, it's Emily, and it works perfectly for her. It works perfectly for the band, and if this is where Linkin Park are going, it's going to be a really exciting next album. What is great here in the lyrics, and I mentioned the chemistry between Mike and Emily before, and in a previous review, I've talked about how I would really love to hear them, kind of properly singing a line each throughout the verse, and we have it in this track, and it sounds great. It really doesn't disappoint. We've heard Mike separately rapping, we've heard Emily in her different tones of what she can do with a voice, which we know is phenomenal. Now they've both come together, line for line, right through the verse. So there's a couple of personal little niggles which I'm not even going to mention, they're that minor. I think the key thing to take away from this is where this track is in the album, the journey that the album takes you on, of this process of how the band have reformed, come together. We've got old sound, we've got new sound, and we're at the penultimate track now of really settled, far more familiar with what Linkin Park, who Linkin Park now are. And I would take an educated guess that this is a really great leaping stone to, like I said before, take into that second album. And here we are, track 11, final track on the album, Good Things Go. This for me really builds on what I've just been saying about the last track, about that synoptic pulling together of the whole journey. And if you just think about the title itself, Good Things Go, there is so many ways that alone can be interpreted without listening to the track. But when you do listen to it, I think the music, the tone of the guitars answer a lot of those questions. The way the track opens up with that lead pick. How we might expect it to go heavy and go hard, but it doesn't. And that's not a bad thing. It's okay. Good things can go. Yeah, I know that was really cheesy. But in all seriousness, the mellowness of the track is a really great close to this epically diverse album. And on a personal note, one of my first reactions was, this is how Over Each Other should have been done. Yeah, I know I need to let it go, but maybe I will do, not just yet. And there you have it. Another review completed. Thank you so much for sticking around for this first album review, and hope to see you in the next one.
Tell and share, tune in friends if you dare.